Okay, so this is the second tutorial, Intro to Arnold, that we're going to be doing in 3ds Max. So all I have is a little tiny scene here, and I have set up a cyclorama, and we're just going to take a little deeper look into the basic parameters for Arnold. So here I have the render settings, and currently I have active shade, but you want Arnold turned on for the Arnold materials, which I have 2 of those applied, to work. Under System, we want to have Legacy 3ds Max map support. Now I have active shade, and we're going to take a look at active shade. So over here we can do our rendering, and for certain lights the active shade does not work, but it is supported by Arnold. If I'm up here and I click, then I go back, I'm in my production render. So if I take a look, you'll see it set itself to production render. And then if I change it down to here, now we're doing an active shade. And what's nice, I'm going to turn off the production render. What's nice with the active shade is I can move the viewport and it will re-render, and I can get an update. Now you'll hear my computer revving a little bit because you're going to get that. It is processor intensive. So this is something that you may want to only use when you have your camera set up and you're doing subtle changes. It's up to you. It depends on your computer strength. Alright, so right now we're going to go and put in an Arnold light. So I'm going to come in and just go underneath my Create menu, go to Lights, and by default you're at Photometric. We're going to go to Arnold. I'm going to click on an Arnold light and then just click. Grab my Move tool and pull it up. And I'll pull it up a little bit further than that. Now we did take a quick look at this lighting, but we haven't looked at really the exposure controls, and we haven't really looked deeply into these light settings. So let's do that a little bit deeper today. So by default, I just have this Arnold light. I'm going to go into the Modifier tab and look at its parameters. We have I have it set for a point light. I'm going to change it to a quad. For some reason it's not populating both columns. There we go. And again, if I have a target on a light, I can select the line between to move the whole unit. I can select the target or the light to move either one. I'm just going to pull this forward a little bit more. And then we're just going to do an active shade so we can take a look at it. So this is what I'm getting with my light. And I'll move this down just a little bit. That'll work. And you can see we're getting that nice feedback, and it's rendering the buckets. I can see it's a bit overly bright, but that's some of the settings I have, and we can adjust those. So under our rendering settings, I have set up the physical camera exposure control. And last time I hadn't set up the exposure control. There is no exposure control for Arnold, and the physical exposure control is one that's recommended to use. So we'll just use that one for now. And then in my lights, again, the refresh is a little weird right now. This normalized energy is the first thing I want to look at with you. So if I turn off normalized energy, we're getting a very dark scene for my exposure and my intensity settings. So if I go back to the default of 8, you'll see, just like we did with the last time, it was pretty dark on our first render. Now, what the normalized energy does is it uses the size of the light to generate the exposure strength. So if I turn this off, you'll see we're getting very overexposed, and I need to cut the exposure to half to get a more reasonable exposure. So if I come in and I start playing with the size of the rectangle, you'll see now it's generating more or less light. And this is a nice way to make subtle adjustments within your exposure. We're going to take a little bit of a look at some of these other settings here. So right now we have the rectangle, and we can see the reflection of it on the cyc. And if I come in, I can go and play with the softness. So if I right click, we go down to 0. And we're going to get a little bit harder light. And I can play with the roundness. So if I bring this up, now you'll see this rectangle looks like a circle in the frame. We also have our spread. So if I pull down the spread, now we have a very small cone of light coming out of the source. I'm just going to bring this roundness by right-clicking back down so you can see the rectangle shape. And let's scoot this over a little bit just so it's in the center. We can see that. So again, our spread, if I pull that out, now I'm getting a bigger, softer spread of that light. And we can, again, play around with a lot of these parameters with some of the other settings. So if I go in from the quad and I go down to, let's say, our disk light, now we have the round disk shape. So in our disk shape, we have our radius, and I can adjust the radius. And of course it affects the light because I have, and I'm just going to restretch to get this out. Here it is, normalize energy. So if I turn it off, the size of this won't affect it. And then of course we have our spread that we can adjust. We have our cylinder light, and this is going to give us a shape of a cylinder. So I'm going to move this down into the frame a little bit more and rotate this so we can see it faced on, and that's the shape of the cylinder. So if you wanted a light source visible in your reflections, then this may be one that works better for you if you have it centralized around objects. Okay. So we can adjust the height, so how wide, turn down the radius a bit. And now we have a thin, long tube. Okay, so to continue looking at the lights, we have a cylinder, and then I'm going to go and select this object here, the torus knot, and I'm going to take the torus knot and turn that into a light. So we have the light selected. We're going to go into our light shape emitter in our Arnold, and down here you'll see mesh. So once I click on mesh, you have none, and then I can click the mesh I want to load as the light source. Now, Arnold is not completely compatible yet with 3ds Max. There are still some issues with it, and one is I cannot click on the light shape visible. So we don't have full illumination with this. But it's there. You can get a certain amount of illumination, and we'll just play around a little bit with this and show that we can make some changes to the light coming off of it. So that is our using our mesh as a light source.